let you know that. All right, is everybody seeing the appropriate screen? Great. So thank you very much for coming. Let me just get rid of that. So we've got a packed agenda. Really, we want to focus on, I'm going to do a brief recap for some of the new faces today. We'll talk about what the goal for this work plan is through June of 2025 and have a discussion, preliminary discussion about the organization of this work plan and figure out what you guys are already doing in your towns. Ultimately, we would love for you to choose a topic and to serve on a work group to do just a little bit of work outside so that we can pull this this plan together. And we'll talk about that later. So, brief recap. I know that we have some new faces and we're thrilled. We want as many people involved in this as possible. So what is this collaborative? We're bringing as many of our towns together to figure out how we can work together towards regional climate resilience. So our partners are numerous and we're psyched. The town of Dedham has served as the fiscal agent, both for phase 1 and phase 2, and we're very grateful to them for doing that. But we're really excited to have you all talking together because we know the opportunity may not come up very often, and we know that climate change is affecting us in different and similar ways. So in phase 1, which ended in June of 2023, we worked with towns to go through all of their existing plans. So MVP plans, hazard mitigation plans, open space and recreation plans, and created a framework of shared priorities. This year we've met with the select boards in each town to sort of talk about this, and we identified, or they identified, or you self-identified members of the steering committee to participate and really flesh out this framework and create a work plan that we can implement together. So ideally, we will, this work plan will contain some projects, local or regional, that can be implemented over the next 3 to 5 years, and we can all work together on, making sure those are funded, and that the resources are there to follow through on that, and to make sure that the public support is there so that cities and towns can get this work done. So what we'd like to do between now and June is to organize the work plan. We've sent around an outline, and we'll send that out again after the meeting, of what we think the work plan, we're suggesting the work plan will look like. And we really want to capitalize on the great projects that you guys are already doing or have already completed towards climate resilience. And want to make sure that we're capturing those that are in the works. We'd love to recruit some additional municipal representatives over time because we know there are a lot of aspects of climate resilience. And, we primarily are working in water, flooding, water quality, but there are a lot of other things that towns need to accomplish to make their communities more resilient to all of the impacts of climate change. We've sort of already in the first phase determined what collaborative membership sort of looks like and what the commitment is. We're not asking for anybody to commit any funding, but we do want a commitment to work together towards advancing climate resilience. And then we also want to include a plan for cultivating that public support because we know town meeting can be difficult, and we want to make sure that we're doing as much education and engagement as possible. So, are there any questions about that so far? The recap. All right. In which case, I will turn it over to Van.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, so in the next few slides, I will introduce the initial work plan outline that we've put together for your reactions and initial feedback before we dive in and start fleshing things out. So in the next slide, just want to show kind of an overview of what is going into this work plan. Obviously, we'll include the intent for this work plan is that if you are just joining or if you've been part of this conversation and building this collaborative, you should be able to understand the context of what have we done and where we're coming from and where we're going with this regional work plan. So we'll include some information about the framework that Carrie just mentioned with the vision and the objectives and all of the processes that had come in identifying the share priorities as well as the priority actions that we would love for the collaborative to work together in the next 3 to 5 years. I should also note that we recognize that the municipalities may be in different stages of climate resilience planning and implementation. And so some of these priority actions we list here for some municipalities, you may have done that. That is okay. We would love to get best practice from you to support towns and cities that are looking to implement similarly. And another thing to note also is in looking at these priority actions that I will show in a second, are there opportunities to turn some of these priority actions, I think, into a regional effort, so to share resource, to streamline the efforts. I think there are some of them here. And so understanding your interest and capacity will be helpful as well as we move forward. And we can have that discussion in the breakout session. So again, in the next 3 to 5 years, it's hard to put things in a box, but we do have to do it sometimes. And so we kind of organize these priority actions into 3 categories of share priorities. And then there are priority actions within these categories that we've selected. We have this discussion and selected from phase 1 of the collaborative development. And for these priority actions, we will develop implementation roadmaps with your support, actually, to make sure that they serve as like a recipe. So if you just tear it out of the work plan book, you should be able to have enough details to help you move forward into the implementation phase. And then, of course, most importantly, we want to make sure that we're centering equity in these implementation roadmaps. And then we will also work together to develop a plan for making sure that the participation contributions to the implementation roadmaps, as well as how to do effective and meaningful community engagement so that they can also be part of the conversation of these implementation of the actions. Next slide. Yes, thanks. So here are the 3 share priorities categories that I was referencing earlier. So all the actions, priority actions that we have discussed and talked through and built criteria to help them rise to the top as most appropriate for this collaborative, we group them into these 3 categories: infrastructure improvements, natural resources, ecological restoration and open space preservation, and policy and planning. So for the first one, infrastructure improvements, in the next slide, you'll see that we, here are the 3 top priority actions that have risen to the top in our discussion when we were building the framework together in phase 1. So assess and upgrade aging infrastructure, including dams, culverts, and pump stations to handle more extreme storm and other impacts of climate change. Analyze future threats to critical infrastructure, facilities, and residential areas based on projections of sea level rise and intense storms. perform vulnerability study on transportation bridges and culverts affected or potentially affected by future flooding, including potential evacuation routes. So we include here the type of climate risk that will be addressed via these priority actions should they be implemented, and the type of project to consider. Like I mentioned, I think some of these many of you, even just in the introduction, I think some are already talking about kind of the culvert assessment. So would love to hear sort of how your experience and or anything lesson learned, things that you could share with the collaborative folks here in the collaborative to, you know, for other folks who might be interested in doing as well. I could see if not all of these actions can potentially be the regional kind of implementation actions that you all together can come together and pursue funding for. Anyway, just some thoughts. So the next one is natural resources ecological restoration and open space preservation. That's a mouthful, but there are only two priority actions here. Protect and promote the preservation and creation of wetlands, including restoration of fill wetlands and floodplain areas, enhance cooling in pocket parks and street to park conversions, integrate opportunities to add new green space to street improvement projects, provide spray parks in neighborhoods currently in hotspot areas or lacking resources such as cooling centers. Great. And then next one. This one is a little bit longer. So there are 4 priority actions we have here on the policy and planning. First one, minimize impervious surface through revising relevant bylaws, zonings, and parking requirements, require new development to incorporate a certain percentage of pervious areas. To conduct a bylaw review across the region to identify regulations that address regional vulnerabilities and priorities, and then support towns, municipalities in implementation of these regulatory updates. Next one, evaluate feasibility of incorporating green infrastructure in all new development projects, create educational programs to promote green infrastructure techniques in landscaping practice. And then last but not least, require low impact development and water conservation techniques in new development and redevelopment to reduce water usage and add connections to the surrounding open space network. All right. So I want to pause here before moving on to see if you have any initial reactions, any questions about these priority actions that were listed here. Anything that jumped out at you? Yes, James. James, go ahead.
I'm sorry. In policy and planning actions, I was hoping that you could entertain a review of wetlands bylaws, also make recommendations to communities or provide any information that would be useful to our group to amend our regulations to make them more dynamic as far as climate change and climate resiliency is concerned.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would cover under priority action number 2. So there's the bylaw review, and so that could be part of that is the wetland bylaws.
All right, I'm sorry. I thought you meant zoning bylaws, so I'm glad you made that clarification. So.
No, yeah. I think that's kind of a suite of different regulatory details that we should look at for sure. But yeah, thank you for noting that.
All right,
we definitely would include that in the implementation roadmap, so that would be a little bit more details. Yeah. Thanks, James. Tom?
Hi, wondering where you think tree policy might fall.
That's a great question. I will throw that back to the group. Actually, I think there are let's see. I think that could fall under the natural resources and ecological restoration and open space preservation actions, as well as under some of the like #1 in policy and planning. But again, this is the priority actions for the collaborative. So you actually get to drive and include the details of it. That's my cop-out answer, but definitely noted. What do you think, Tom? Where should that go? Oh, sorry, Ian.
I was just going to observe, and you do have one that's creating pocket parks and street to park conversions. Is not so much policy, but yeah, #2 there.
Yeah.
And Van, I think you posed a question also to me on where I think it should go. Did I catch that right?
Yeah.
I think it's a policy for sure. I mean, as the spirit of this is to try to look a little more comprehensively at within each town's bylaws. I heard some folks talk about their wetlands, or sorry, their stormwater review process and trying to upgrade those. And I know we're doing that in Canton across multiple different departments. And it's the tree issue is we see it in the Conservation Commission. We see it in the development. We see it in energy siting. It kind of crosses multiple priorities. We see it in wetlands preservation, restoration. So I think it might be best in the policy and planning to get across natural resources and energy and development.
Yeah. Carrie, if you move on to the next slide, I think it could fall in priority action #3, evaluate feasibility of incorporating green infrastructure. This is more specifically to new development. So maybe that's something that we could tweak, but part of the implementation roadmap or details could be about, develop or review policy around tree plantings as part of this, as part of the development requirements. Thoughts? Or we'll let that settle. We can have more of that this discussion in the breakout session too, but we'll definitely note that. Great. Thank you, Tom. Any other questions or comments? Great. I just also want to this is really great, for us to think like what else is still missing. But again, just to kind of draw you back to this is the work plan we hope to be able to implement in the next 3 to 5 years. So not discounting anything, but want to make sure it's also, I'm sure there are things that may be missing, but definitely something that we maybe just kind of park and really consider whether, what is the most feasible to be done in the next 3 to 5 years too. And so that's what we're trying to, scale it down as much as we can to make sure that it's practical, feasible, and implementable. On that note. All right, next one, please, Carrie. All right, so just a quick introduction of what goes into these implementation roadmaps. Think of it again as a recipe, kind of the details of how we're going to implement these actions. So with these priority actions, we'll have a description of what that means. Why are we doing, why the benefit or the advantage of these priority when implementing these priority actions. And then we'll hope to identify the implementation lead, those who will be, who should be part of kind of driving the implementation of the action. We'll detail the key implementation next steps. So to James and Tom's kind of comments and questions and suggestions just now, maybe some of the very detailed, like, review wetland bylaws, thinking about tree policy or tree planting policy. that can go into this this key implementation next steps, as well as kind of before we can go and plant or do something more physical. And then identifying who are the partners. And this can include both, internal departments within a municipality, as well as community-based organization folks, community members, folks who have been advocating for us at the same topic in these actions. Want to list out also what are the co-benefits, to Tom's point earlier about the tree planting, right? Like it can kind of touch across a different topic, from public health, clean energy, nature-based solution as well. So we'll try to list that as much as possible. I think it would be a good kind of talking points and list for you to share, because I know a lot of you folks will have to go to the planning board or select board to get fund, or to just approve the implementation of these actions as well. Most importantly, funding sources. Where are we going to get the money to implement these actions? So we'll try to list out as many of the possible financial avenues that we can think of and have done. For those who have implemented any of these actions, it will be also great for the collaborative to know, any sources that you have recommendations. And again, improving equity. How is the implementation of these priority actions will help center and improve equity to the municipality, as the communities, and the region at large. And of course, we want to make sure to measure what success would look like when implementing these actions. So we'll get your feedback on that to make sure that we can track and the success of the progress and success of these actions as well. So I'll pause again for any questions, any additional details that you think we should add to the implementation roadmaps that would be helpful. Okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead, James. I think you're on mute if you're speaking.
If there are any draft regulations available for climate resiliency to share with us in the immediate future, that'd be very helpful, so that we can, expedite the regulation amendments before the next town meeting deadline.
Yeah, I think NEPRA team is the brain trust behind a lot of the language, right, Carrie? Looking at you, just voluntold. But also, Rodoshi, if you can drop in the chat the link to the MAPC Climate Resilience Land Use Strategies page. It's a resource portal that we have pulled in a lot of the examples, and some of them have language for bylaw update, regulatory updates, and things like that too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I will say we don't have a model wetlands bylaw, but we'd be happy to help you with that. And we can talk to other colleagues about what's been working in their towns. Yeah.
And before we move into the breakout session, I guess one more plug too, and just sorry to jump ahead, but I guess think about these priority actions, but just generally, like, James, to your point, like these models and things that you're requesting to see. We will have a technical assistant workshop coming up in a few months. So just think through, like, what are some of the topics that you would like to suggest to us, so that we have some ideas and we can program that workshop accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we will now go into breakout groups to have a more in-depth conversation. Some questions for you to consider. We will have facilitator in each group, and we'll work. You'll have a little bit more visual and Miro board to work through. But here are some of the questions we want to ask you. So start thinking about, what do you think about the proposed work plan? What your towns are already working on? Anything should be added? Any example, any of these actions relevant to your municipality specifically, anything you've done. And then if you have time, think about any other actions that should be added, key implementation steps, I would say, or expanded in these shared priorities categories and priority actions we have here. Okay. So with that.
And I was going to ask just one